Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and this is the Astral Library. And we are back for another monthly wrap-up because as I'm recording this, it is officially August. So July is well and done. And I have to say, July felt so long. I'm talking about it was forever. Like July stretched on like 2 months long, it felt like. So I'm kind of glad that it's over because I really and truly just want it to be done. And I think a lot of that is because it's just how hot July was this year for California. Like I'm sure you can hear the AC in the background because it's been running non-stop and I'm only slightly dreading my electricity bill, but it is 100% worth it because I cannot deal with this heat anymore. I can't. I'm done. I'm so done. But we are not here for me to rant about the heat of July. We are here to wrap up all the reading I did in July, which was surprisingly a lot. So I have my statistics here from Storygraph in their new, actually really cute monthly graphic that they're doing. So I have it all just at the touch of my hand. So in July, I read a total of 13 books, which totaled out to 3,888 pages. I was so close to 4,000 pages. Ooh, if I just read another book or so. And I had an average star rating of 3.72. It was actually almost to a 4-star until like the very last day of July where I read 2 books that I rated rather low. That's what killed it. I was almost at a 4-star read, which means I had a really great reading month. Some other statistics just because why not? The average book length that I was reading was 287 pages, which makes sense. I read a lot of graphic novels this month. Average time to finishing books was 2 days. I don't know how accurate that is because I'm sometimes really bad about like updating my story graph on my Goodreads, even though like I'll read some days but I won't log it in until I'm like reading a bigger amount. I don't know, sometimes I forget, so I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. I read mostly fiction books, but a couple non-fictions, which I'll get to. And then I read a total of 6 fantasy books, 6 graphic novels, 5 young adults, 3 classics, and 3 LGBTQ plus books. And they were all print. I didn't read any digital books. Okay, so those are the statistics. Let's go ahead and dive into like what the actual books are and what were my thoughts about them. Okay, so I actually got a lot of books from the library this past month. So I actually don't have a good chunk of the books with me anymore, but thankfully I logged them all on my Goodreads so I can talk about them as they come up. But as usual, I'm gonna go ahead and start with the books that I'm reading for school, so things I'm reading for my dissertation that I'm not gonna get into a whole lot of depth. And I read 4 books for my dissertation. So the first book I read for school was Jonah's Gourdvine by Zora Neale Hurston, which this is actually her very first novel. If you saw my book haul, I talked a little bit about this book and why I picked it up because for my dissertation, I am focusing on the Harlem Renaissance and Zora Neale Hurston is a really big author in that. So I wanted to go ahead and make sure I'm reading her backlog before my big scary test in May. So this was her very first book, which I never actually read before. So it was actually kind of fun to see where she started and how this compares with her most famous novel, which is Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is an okay read. I wouldn't say that the main character was like the most interesting person to follow along with, but I really enjoy the way she uses Black vernacular and the way she kind of like mimics verbal speech in her writing. I think that's always really, really interesting to see, even though Zora Neale Hurston's books work best as an audiobook because of that. But there does not exist an audiobook of Jonah's Gourdvine, which I looked so hard for. I was willing to like spend the money on Audible, but could not find it. Did not exist, so I read it. The next book I read for school was Cain by Jane Toomer. This one you can see I have definitely a lot more thoughts going on in this one. So Cain's really interesting in its composition because it's made up of a lot of different vignettes in that we're following different characters and sometimes it's punctuated by poetry or music and song. The construction of it is very, very interesting. At times it kind of got a little experimental for me, more so in terms of like what you would think of like traditional modernism in that like experimental language and the way in which these authors sometimes like try to like really play with form and lean more into that stream of consciousness. So that was definitely like the last chunk of this book, which I didn't find super interesting. You can see my interest sort of like petered off towards the end. But still overall an interesting book. I'm glad I read it, especially because this is a book that's like mentioned over and over again in articles talking about the Harlem Renaissance and modernism, and I hadn't actually read it. I only like skimmed parts here or there, but now I can say I read it, so another win for me. The next book I have is actually another novel. It is Black No More by George Schuster. So this is a speculative fiction kind of sci-fi book in which we are following this world where a doctor has found a way to reverse someone's blackness and essentially use vitiligo to kind of like make a black person white in all appearances. So you can no longer tell who is black and who is white after a black person goes through this procedure. We're following our main character, Max, who undergoes this procedure. He's one of the first and kind of his new life after he passes as white. This one is very interesting, especially because Max is not a likable character at all, but this brought up a lot of questions about blackness and kind of its role in society, especially at the end where we have a sort of reversal going on. You can see that I've had a lot of thoughts in this one, so many tabs, because I had so many tabs, like, oh, this would be really interesting, like, oh, I should compare this to this. This is a book I definitely foresee that I'm gonna be writing quite a bit about in my dissertation. And then the only nonfiction I have in this list, I read another book this week, which is why I think I'm conflating the two, but the other one I read for my dissertation was Mad Blackness, which is a nonfiction work by, I'm going to butcher her name and I'm so sorry, it's Theory Alice Pickens. This is a really interesting text that focuses on the correlation of Black studies and disability studies and the intersection between madness and black. Very, very kind of like theoretical text, sometimes a little hard to follow, but all the points that Pickens was bringing up was like super interesting and it like held my attention. In fact, I was tabbing this thing so much I ran out of orange tabs and I had to like revert to this like peachy color, which I'm a little sad about. Another thing I'm really glad to have read for my dissertation, because even though I'm not dealing with disability studies and like what I'm focusing on, the kind of intersection between them and how they're both treated and how they're both excluded from the overall definitions of the nation, of American, of society and human, got me thinking a lot about how I'm trying to use blackness within my own work. So those were all the texts I read for school, just kind of like a widespread of things. Like I said, I don't tend to talk about what I do for school so much on this channel, but I thought like every now and then just a little glimpse is fun, especially in these videos where it's about like what are you doing throughout the month. That's part of it. But now into the fun books. So we're just gonna go straight in order here. So these from what I read. So the first book that I read for the month actually was Night Broken by Patricia Briggs. This is the 8th book in the Mercy Thompson series. So in this one, Adam's ex-wife actually shows up and she's being stalked by a person. And even though Mercy and her don't get along, Mercy is of course not going to turn her away when she is in need of help. And so Mercy finds herself not only sucked into whatever is going on with this mysterious stalker that is stalking Adam's ex-wife, she also has to deal with the mind games Chrissy is bringing as she is kind of trying to fit herself back into the pack and potentially try to win Adam back, which Mercy is not going to let happen. I ended up giving this one 4 stars because I felt like the pacing of the story was really, really good, and I felt like it was interesting enough that it held my attention, much more so than the last one, which I felt kind of like had an odd pacing. The only thing that kind of like knocked this one down is that there's a like second act in this book where like another problem was kind of just sprung onto Mercy and she's kind of having to figure out like what the fuck's going on. I didn't love that, but I did love getting to meet a couple new characters, so that was fun. And following that, I continued my Mercy Thompson marathon and I read the last book I ever left off on in the series, which was Fire Touch. This is the 9th book in the Mercy Thompson series. In this one, she's going against the Fae. In this world, the Fae have kind of like hidden themselves away after they've revealed their existence to the humans, and they've kind of all just disappeared. Even Mercy's close friend, she really can't get in contact with. Well, one day the police call Adam's pack saying like, hey, there's a troll on the bridge, shit's going down, come help out. And so as they're going to like see what all the situation is, they end up running to Mercy's Fae friend and a child who is actually someone who has escaped from the Underhill, or the like magical hub of fairyland that Fae are actually not able to access anymore. And so they are hunting down this child not only to get that connection back to the Underhill, but also to torture him for his gifts. And Mercy will not turn someone down if they need help, and so she of course offers her help and gets herself involved in Fae politics, and as usual it just leads to more and more trouble. The thing with the Fae books in this series is that they're either really interesting or really not for me. I think this one was a pretty good middle ground. There was like slow moments where I found myself putting it down, which is why I think it took me so long to get back to this book, because every time I thought about it and every time would like think about rereading the series, I remember like putting this one down and not wanting to pick it up. But I powered through that this time to finally push through this last break so I can try to catch up to the series before it gets any bigger, because I think it's at something like 15 books now, which is crazy. And it's still being published. So if I'm not gonna catch up anytime soon, I'm just gonna be buried in books, and I really don't need that. Don't hold me to this, but I think I'm gonna try to finish and get caught up on Mercy Thompson by the end of this year. So going into 2025, I will be completely caught up with the series and can pick up the books as they come out and read them for fun, because they're really easy books to read. These are the books I turn to when I'm in a reading slump, because it's just short, sweet, mind off. I did end up giving this one 3 stars just because, like I said, there's a lot of parts where I like put it down, and I understood why I set this book down for so long, even though I was on like a marathon. So after those 2 books, I actually have another reread, and that was Air of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 3rd book, technically the 4th book if you count the novella series of the Throne of Glass series. So you're like, Emily, why did you read book 3? Did you read books 1 and 2 and the short stories? No, I did not. The thing is, my friend is listening to Throne of Glass for the first time via audiobook. I love her dearly. She sometimes doesn't like catch all the details. And so when I was telling her about the series, because she knows it's my favorite SJM series, and I was telling her about this book because this is the book that tends to break people. It's a diversive book, right? I was telling her like there's a lot going on to this book, and it's a very different pacing than the first 2 books, which read very much YA. And I feel like this is where we start to see that turn into like the early stages of what we call new adult now. And so I was like, let me reread it with you, so that way when you're talking to me about this book and like saying this character, like what's going on here, I can actually have a better frame of reference of what is going on, rather than me trying to just remember everything that happened in the book, which is a lot. A lot of things happen in these books. You see how chunky this thing is? It's huge. And there's so many different perspective shifts that I was like, I need to reread this. Rereading this, I love Throne of Glass. I think it's the best thing Sarah J. Maas did. And that is probably a hot take for a lot of people, because most people really love A Court of Thorns and Roses and sees that as her best series. I digress. But reading this is actually giving me an epiphany of why I don't like multi-POV stories, which is weird because I like this book. This book is rated 5 stars in my kind of like original rating for the series. And that's because how Sarah J. Maas does multi-POV is how I want all my books to be done in multi-POV. In that I don't want you to switch every chapter between a character. I don't. I think it ruins the momentum, especially when we're giving these really high tension moments. You cut me off and put me in some other character's perspective, because 9 times out of the 10, I won't give a shit about that character. And I'm a person who will skip it. If something's going on back with Aelin and you're switching me to Manon, I will skip Manon. But I didn't find myself skipping her just to get back to Aelin. And that wasn't because I remembered everything that happened. I didn't. But because Sarah J. Maas will break her own pattern in switching point of views. So she might start with, oh, we're starting with Aelin, then we go to Chaol, and then we go to Manon, and then back to Aelin, and so on and so forth. But if something's going on with one of the characters, whether that be Chaol, Manon, or Aelin, the next chapter will be in that same perspective, and she will ride the momentum until it gets to like a natural lull, and then she'll move on to another character. Which, why is that not the standard? Why do we have stories that pull me out of that kind of moment and throw me back into a scene where I have to scramble to remember what's going on? It's annoying, and that's why I don't like it, and that's why I find myself frustrated every time I have a multi-POV. Not the case here. Had a great time reading this, and had a great time like actually knowing what my friend was saying when she was bringing up like hyper specific details or had these like weird questions. But honestly, I think the most fun is she's trying to figure out who Aelin is getting with, and the joy I get out of just like hearing her guess, making sure she doesn't like get closer to the truth so she can have that reveal. Oh, the power rush I feel. She actually just finished book 4. She's moving on to book 5, and I cannot wait till she gets to the end of that book, because it's going to be so good. I remember my reaction reading that book and then having to wait for the next one. And I'm not talking about fucking Tower of Dawn, I'm talking about Kingdom of Ash, okay? If you remember the wait from Empire Storm to Kingdom of Ash, you understand me, okay? You understand me! So I cannot wait for her to reach that end, okay? Okay. Next, we have a graphic novel, which I don't actually have here, and that is Grimoire Noir by Vera Greentea. So this is actually kind of like a grimdarky retelling where we have this town where only women are born with powers and they cannot leave the town. I think that either there's like some sort of magical barrier that is preventing them from leaving, or if they do, it like would destroy the rest of the world. I don't quite remember the mechanics. I don't think it was like ever really explained super well, but we're actually following Bucky, our main character, who is a boy and does not have any powers, even though he has desperately wanted them. And where we are meeting Bucky is that his sister has just mysteriously disappeared out the window one day, and no one knows where she's at. As a town searching for her, his mother is in utter despair, and one thing about his mom is when her mood affects the weather, so the town is literally drowning in her tears, and Bucky's trying to solve the mystery of what happened to his sister. And he ends up running into various different covens in the town and making connections with an old friend and just trying to figure out what is going on in this town and what are people trying to hide with the disappearance of his little sister. It was very good. The art style in this was so beautiful. I will be picking up more of Vera Green Teen's work because I loved her art. It was so good. And the story was the perfect balance between spooky and interesting and kind of emotional because of not only Bucky's emotion and feeling left out and excluded from the rest of the town, and especially his friendship with one of the characters, but also that side character had a really tragic backstory and just was a really complex character in her own right, despite not being a quote-unquote main character. The only thing about this that kind of tore it down for me was the fact that I did not like the ending. The ending felt just a little rushed for me. I would have liked it to be drawn out just a tad bit more and to get a little bit more closure. I'm not a fan of the open ending. I'll be honest. I don't like them. I like closure for my stories, unless you're gonna give me a series, which I don't think this one is. So I ended up giving this a 3.5 star, which I did believe I rounded up to a 4 star for good read. Still, overall, a good read, just that ending ruined it for me. The next book I actually do have in my hand, and that is The Adventure Zone Volume 6, These Suffering Games, which is the latest installment in the Adventure Zone series. I was very, very excited for this because the Suffering Game was one of my favorite arcs for the podcast. I wish I could say that this was amazing and it was my favorite entry, but it really wasn't. So a couple things I learned while reading this. One, they changed a lot from the original podcast where they took out like just a lot of different plot points. We didn't spend nearly as much time as Wonderland as I think we should have. And the next book is going to be the last entry in this series, which is not at all what I was expecting. I thought we were at least getting 2 more, with the Stolen Century being the last major one and then maybe some more expansion on the final arc. But they are combining the 2 of them together and wrapping it up in the next volume. And I think that is a really big mistake. This arc had a lot of really important plot points and really sets us up for the finale to happen. But because we were rushing through this one, like even the size of this graphic novel is a lot shorter than the last one, which was also a really beefy arc that gave us a lot of good setup for the larger story. And this one just felt too fast. The things they took out didn't quite make sense of why they were removed, and it made other things go by really, really quickly. And it didn't do justice, I think, to Wonderland, which was such an interesting, like, villainous area to be in, and I think showed us a lot about our characters. I'm not saying this was like the worst thing ever. I still gave this a 4 star because the art's still great. I still love seeing our characters, and what was shown of Wonderland, like of that arc, was really well done. I just wish it was longer because the story is so good, and to feel it kind of like lose the momentum it's had with every great installment and every great volume at the last 2 is devastating, because the end of the podcast is the best time of the podcast. The Suffering Game, The Lost Century, and Battle of Story and Song are killer. Some of the best storytelling, period. And it's being ruined, and I'm sad about it. I'm so sad about it. I just wanted to be good, and I just wanted this to be amazing, and it wasn't, and I'm mad, but I'm still gonna buy the next volume. So that was the last of the physical books I have. So everything else has been returned to the library, which next up I read was actually a 5-star read, and that was Himawari House by Harmony Becker. This is a graphic novel series that I've been seeing for quite a while. It's done by First Second Publication, which is my favorite graphic novel publication. animation, and it's following a Japanese American girl who is taking a gap year from high school and college, and she's doing so in Japan, where she was actually born. But it's been many, many years since she's gone back, and so she's forgotten the language, and she doesn't really fit in. And so she ends up staying at this share house with a couple other international people who are living there, as well as I think 2 Japanese men who just like live there permanently. The graphic novel follows not only our main character, but also the other 2 women in the house, showing how they came to Japan, what's their own journeys, what's their own lives like living in Japan, and the relationship they all kind of create a sort of found family. It's a very cute graphic novel, but the ending broke my heart so much. I remember getting to the end of that book and like that last page, and then it was done, and I flipped back like, no, this can't be over. It can't be, there must be more, and there was no more. There was no more. I wish there was, because it was so good. And I like every character felt so vibrant and alive on the page. They felt like real people. That was really part of that group, and that I knew these people. That's a feeling that I just love in contemporary works, like when they really make me feel for the characters we're reading about. I loved it. It was great. And the ending was so heartbreaking. It was fitting. It wasn't a bad ending. It was just a sad one. I hope there's more. I hope that everyone gets their happy ending. I hope everyone ends up happy and in love and fulfilled in everything they choose to do. Down to the last few. The next I read was Blackwater. By Jeanette Arrow and Ren Graham. So this is another graphic novel that I've seen on my periphery. I picked up from the library. So in this book, we're following our main character, Tony, who is one of the popular boys at school. He runs track. He's pretty well known by everyone. He has a few really close friends that he talks to all the time, and he just seems to be like the top of the social food chain. However, he always runs into another kid who goes to his school who's a little bit more antisocial, doesn't really interact with people, and is actually absent very often. And that is Eli. And we learn that Eli is chronically ill with an autoimmune disease, which is why he misses school so much. However, the days he does go to school, he runs into Tony at the bus stop, and they ride the bus together. And Tony is always drawn to Eli for some reason, so he finds himself staring and trying to come up with reasons of why he could talk to Eli. However, Eli, being antisocial, is very wary of Tony's approaches, and the 2 clash more than they get along, especially when Tony's friend bullies Eli, and it just leads to more and more misunderstandings between them. However, the big twist of the story is that there's a paranormal element. Eli can actually see ghosts, and Tony is attacked by a mysterious creature in the woods while he's out hunting with his friend and his family, and finds himself changing into something. So now Tony must figure out what is going on with himself, and Eli is trying to figure out why is this ghost of a fisherman constantly following him and trying to tell him something. This graphic novel I wanted to like so bad. I really did. But everything felt just a little forced to me, and the characters felt really flat. So Tony was the track star. He was the popular boy. Eli was the antisocial one. The couple best friends, he was the bully. She was the goth girl. And it just didn't really give us any depth with them. Additionally, I think that the pacing of the story was a bit weird. We have a lot of moments where it seems slow, and that it just kind of like picks up and goes towards the last chunk of the book. So that wasn't my favorite. I liked the paranormal elements. I wish we got a little more of the paranormal elements. Like, why can Eli see ghosts? I wish there was a little bit more development between Tony and his dad, which had a very like tense relationship from the page 1 of the graphic novel, but just seemed to like magically fix itself by the end. I wanted more. I don't know if I wanted this to be a series, if I wanted it to just be a little bit longer, because it was on the shorter side, but I just needed more from it. And so I ended up giving this a 3-star rating. Okay, the last 2 that I read, I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about them together. I read book 1 and 2 of the Clementine graphic novel by Tilly Walden, and both of these books are actually what tanked my rating for the end of July, because both of these were 3-star books. So if you've ever played the Telltale games, The Walking Dead, Clementine is the main character from that series. And we follow her through, I think like 2 or 3 games and just like her life living through the zombie apocalypse and trying to survive and inevitably getting maimed and the home she creates destroyed along the way. The graphic novel series picks up right after the last game, which there's never going to be another game because Telltale Games died and Clementine's story was just kind of like left in the balance, I guess, until Tilly Walden got the rights and was able to write more to it. So we're following Tilly as she ends up at this like ski resort high in the mountains, deep with the snow, and she's trying again to build a home, build somewhere that's going to be safe from the zombie apocalypse, where they're not going to be attacked and they can hopefully survive and live in comfort. Clementine has learned many times she cannot trust people, and so the entire time she's there she is wary and always on the lookout for zombies that are the biggest threat to her safety and those around her. I love Clementine. I think she's a really good character, and I especially think she's a great study in what a properly jaded character looks like, because Clementine has been living in the zombie apocalypse since she was like 7, 8 years old. She was really young when the first game happened, and she's had to see so many people that she's loved and cared about, all her father figures and friends, have died because of the zombies. And she's seen the worst of humanity and how they betray each other so quickly for resources, and she's had to learn to kill. And on top of that, she's never been able to really go to school. And that's something I think the Walking Dead games and this series does really well, that it's dealing with the real consequences of people who are growing up during the zombie apocalypse and don't have the same education as, say, someone who finished middle school or high school, because there is no school. There is no one to teach them, and they're left to kind of like scramble. So like we see Clementine struggling to write her name or to understand what certain topics are. All very kind of like a realistic look at like the zombie apocalypse through the lens of someone who is an actual child. Especially when we get to like people starting relationships but not understanding like how to practice safe sex. All of that is present in the books. It's so good. And Clementine's gay. She gets a female lover in this one, which is really nice to see. Why'd I give it a 3-star then? I like Tilly Walden's art. I have read almost all her works. In fact, I think I've read everything by her except Spinning, but I don't like her art when there's no color to go with it. So both volumes of Clementine are entirely in black and white. And I think with the roughness and like more sketchy appearance of Tilly Walden's work, I think they just didn't lend itself to a monochrome palette. I feel like it really took away from a lot of the things I liked about Tilly Walden's art. And I thought it was gonna be just a 2-volume series. There is actually a 3rd. I don't know if I will pick up the 3rd, especially since it's not already published. I think if I come across it in a library like I did these 2, I might pick it up, but I'm not in any hurry to do so. I think I have enough series to worry about on my list. Okay, but that is all the books I read for July. Again, another really good reading month for me. You know, when I'm not in school, I guess I'm reading a lot. I just tend to gravitate toward things I like. And I think July was overall a good reading month for me. Again, I was almost to a 4-star read for the month, so that was very fun. We'll have to see what August has in store for us. Maybe we'll finally reach that average 4-star rating. Who knows? But if you like this video, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know, what did you read this month? How many books did you read? What was your favorite? What was your least favorite? What is something you're looking forward to reading in the next month? I would love to know. But that is it for me. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!